Conclusion of the eventful history of the mutiny and piratical seizure of H.M.S. Bounty, its cause and consequences. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Denny Sayers. The eventful history of the mutiny and piratical seizure of H.M.S. Bounty by Sir John Barrow. Conclusion. Many useful and salutary lessons of conduct may be drawn from this eventful history, more especially by officers of the Navy, both old and young, as well as by those subordinate to them. In the first place, it most strongly points out the dreadful consequences that are almost certain to ensue from a state of insubordination and mutiny on board a ship of war, and the equally certain fate that, at one time or other, awaits all those who have the misfortune to be concerned in a transaction of this revolting nature. In the present instance, the dreadful retribution which overtook them, and which was evinced in a most extraordinary manner, affords an awful and instructive lesson to seamen, by which they may learn that although the guilty may be secured for a time in evading the punishment due to the offended laws of society, yet they must not hope to escape the pursuit of divine vengeance. It will be recollected that the number of persons who remained in the Bounty after her piratical seizure, and of course charged with the crime of mutiny, was 25. That these subsequently separated into two parties, 16 having landed at Otaheite, and afterwards taken from thence in the Pandora as prisoners, and 9 having gone with the Bounty to Pitcairn's Island. Of the 16 taken in the Pandora, 1, Mr. Peter Heywood, midshipman, sentenced to death, but pardoned. 2, James Morbison, boatswain's mate, sentenced to death, but pardoned. 3, William Musprat, commander's steward, sentenced to death, but pardoned. 4, Thomas Burkitt, seaman, condemned and executed. 5, John Millward, seaman, condemned and executed. 6, Thomas Ellison, seaman, condemned and executed. 7, Joseph Coleman, armorer, condemned and executed. 8, Charles Norman, carpenter's mate, tried and acquitted. 9, Thomas Mackintosh, carpenter's crew, tried and acquitted. 10, Michael Byrne, seaman, tried and acquitted. 11, Mr. George Stewart, midshipman, drowned in irons when the Pandora was wrecked. 12, John Sumner, seaman, drowned in irons. 13, Richard Skinner, seaman, drowned in irons. 14, Henry Hildrant, cooper, drowned in irons. 15, Charles Churchill, master-at-arms, murdered by Matthew Thompson. 16, Matthew Thompson, seaman, murdered by Churchill's friends in Otaheite. Of the 9 who landed in Pitcairn's Island, 1, Mr. Fletcher Christian, acting lieutenant, murdered by the Otaheitans. 2, John Williams, seaman, murdered by the Otaheitans. 3, Isaac Martin, seaman, murdered by the Otaheitans. 4, John Mills, gunner's mate, murdered by the Otaheitans. 5, William Brown, botanist's assistant, murdered by the Otaheitans. 6, Matthew Quintal, seaman, put to death by Young and Adams in self-defense. 7. William McCroy, seaman, became insane and killed by throwing himself from a rock. 8. Mr. Edward Young, midshipman, died of asthma. 9. Alex Smith, alias John Adams, seaman, died in 1829. Young officers of the Navy, as well as the common seamen, may also derive some useful lessons from the events of this history. They will see the melancholy results of affording the least encouragement for seamen to depart from their strict line of duty, and to relax in that obedience to the orders of superiors, by which alone the discipline of the service can be preserved. They will learn how dangerous it is to show themselves careless and indifferent in executing those orders, by thus setting a bad example to the men. It ought also to enforce on their minds how necessary it is to avoid even the appearance of acting in any way that can be considered as repugnant to or subversive of the rules and regulations of the service, and most particularly to guard against any conduct that may have the appearance of lowering the authority of their superiors, either by their words or actions. No doubt can remain on the minds of unprejudiced persons, or such as are capable of weighing evidence, that the two young midshipmen, Stewart and Heywood, were perfectly innocent of any share in the transaction in question, and yet, because they happened to be left in the ship, not only contrary to their wish and intention, but kept down below by force, the one lost his life by being drowned in chains, and the other was condemned to die, and only escaped from suffering the last penalty of the law by a recommendation to the royal mercy. The only point in which these two officers failed was, that they did not at once demand permission to accompany their commander, while they were allowed to remain on deck, and had the opportunity of doing so. The manly conduct of young Heywood, throughout his long and unmerited sufferings, affords an example of firmness, fortitude, and resignation to the divine will that is above all praise. In fact, nothing short of conscious innocence could have supported him in the severe trials he had to undergo. The melancholy effects which tyrannical conduct, harsh and opprobrious language, ungovernable passion, and a worrying and harassing temper on the part of naval commanders seldom fail to produce on the minds of those who are subject to their capricious and arbitrary command, are strongly exemplified in the cause and consequences of the mutiny in the Bounty, as described in the course of this history. Conduct of this kind, by making the inferior officers of a ship discontented and unhappy, has the dangerous tendency, as in the case of Christian, to incite the crew to partake in their discontent, and be ready to assist in any plan to get rid of the tyrant. We may see in it, also, how very little credit a commander is likely to gain, either with the service or the public at large, when the duties of a ship are carried on as they would appear to have been in the Pandora, in a cold, phlegmatic, and unfeeling manner, and with an indifference to the comfort of all around him, subjecting offenders of whatever description to unnecessary restraint, and a severity of punishment which, though strictly within the letter of the law, contributes in no way to the ends of discipline or of justice. The conduct of Bligh, however mistaken he may have been in his mode of carrying on the duties of the ship, was most exemplary throughout the long and perilous voyage he performed in an open boat on the wide ocean, with the most scanty supply of provisions and water, and in the worst weather. The result of such meritorious conduct holds out every encouragement to both officers and men, by showing them that, by firmness and perseverance, and the adoption of well digested measures, steadily pursued in spite of opposition, the most hopeless undertaking, to all appearance, may be successfully accomplished. And lastly, the fate that has attended almost every one of those concerned in the mutiny and piracy of His Majesty's ship Bounty ought to operate as a warning to, and make a deep impression on, the minds of our brave seamen, not to suffer themselves to be led astray from the straightforward line of their duty, either by order or persuasion of some hot-brained, thoughtless, or designing person, whether their superior or equal, but to remain faithful under all circumstances to their commanding officer, as any mutinous proceedings or disobedience of his orders are sure to be visited upon them in the long run, either by loss of life or by a forfeiture of that liberal provision which the British government has bestowed on its seamen for long and faithful services. P.S. Just as this last sheet came from the press, the editor has noticed, with a feeling of deep and sincere regret, a paragraph in the newspapers, said to be extracted from an American paper, stating that a vessel sent to Pitcairn's Island by the missionaries of Otaheite has carried off the whole of the settlers to the latter island. If this be true, and the mention of the name of Knot gives a colour to the transaction, the cherubim must have slept, the flaming sword have been sheathed, and another Eden has been lost. And what is worse than all, that native simplicity of manners, that purity of morals, and that singleness of heart, which so peculiarly distinguish this little interesting society, are all lost. They will now be dispersed among the missionary stations as humble dependents, where Kitty Quintal and the rest of them may get food for their souls, such as it is, in exchange for the substantial blessings they enjoyed on Pitcairn's Island. End of the conclusion. Read by Dennis Sayers in Modesto, California, for LibriVox.